All right, so in this Leetcode challenge, the challenge is to validate a Sudoku board. So if we look at the problem statement, determine if a 9 by 9 Sudoku board is valid. Only the filled cells need to be validated according to the following rules. So each row must contain the digits 1 to 9 without repetition. Okay, they're not going to repeat on each other over the rows. Each column must contain the digits 1 to 9 without repetition, right, each column. And each of the 9 3 by 3 sub boxes of the grid must contain the digits 1 to 9 without repetition. Okay. So a Sudoku board partially filled could be valid, but is not necessarily solvable. Okay. So we don't have to detect if it is solvable. And only the filled cells need to be validated according to dimension rules. So we don't need to validate the blank cells. And as you can see down here, then blank cells are going to be represented by a dot. Okay, let's just copy this into our Zyboard. And let's see how we are going to solve this. All right, so let's make that a bit bigger. All right, so we got a board, and we know then we need to validate each of the rows. Each of the cells are going to be digits for each row, and they're not going to be repeatable. And we can accept dots, right? So we can iterate through each of our boards. We can get each row board of 0 to 8. So we can iterate through them. So we also need to get each of our columns, right? So in terms of columns, then we need to get the board of 0 to 8 of that value I, right? So we're going to for each of our columns, we are going to iterate over each of them, right? Each of the rows. So that'll get our columns back. So we're going to loop again. So in terms of how to get the boxes, so in terms of getting that, let's have a look at this, right? So we need to get all these elements of the box. We can get each row just with the 9 elements of the array by iterating over the board of the row. We will get each column by iterating over the columns of each row. And to get the box, then our best bet would probably be to determine a starting position in each of the box. All right, so if we can determine the starting position, then we just need to iterate 3 by 3 to get all the elements of the box. So in this case, we're going to have I is equal to 0 and j is equal to 0. In this case, then here, I is going to be equal to 0 and j is equal to 3, and so on. So it looks like we're going to increment, we're going to have a for loop. We're going to increment I by start with 0 and increment by 3, and the same with j. So that should be able to get all the elements in our box. Okay, so let's just switch over to the code and let's start coding. Okay, so we know if we do a system.out.println on the board in the first position, right, 0 position, we should get the first row. So we should get this row. And let's just return a true to make sure this compiles. And if we do run code, so we get 5, 3, dot 7, and number of dots. Okay, so we printed the first row. And then to get all of the rows, let's just create a for loop, and let's just iterate over the board. And let's just board of I. So that should print all of our rows. Okay, so if we return each of our rows as a one-dimensional array, so we're going to turn each of our rows as a one-dimensional array. We can return each of our columns as a one-dimensional array as well, and then each of our squares as a one-dimensional array. Then we can perform, a validation over a one-dimensional array. So let's create a validate function, which is going to turn a Boolean. It's going to take in an array, char array, and okay, so we're going to need to validate this. So in terms of validation, we are going to have to, so if we take this first row, we are going to have to, pick the first cell and compare it to all other cells and make sure it's not the same. We have to ignore dots, so dots are acceptable. We don't have to worry, dots can be the same. And we have to check that each of these cells is a digit or a dot. Okay, so we need two loops, right? So we're going to iterate over the row. I plus plus. Int j is equal to 0. J is less than length j plus plus. Okay, so in our first condition, we're not, when we're looping over them, we're comparing 5 to the other members of the array. When the two variables I and j are the same, we want to ignore that, right? So if I is not equal to j, we will continue in here. Okay, so now we want to check if the array of I is equal to the array of j. So if the character is the same, it's not looking at the same cell, right? It's the same, and the array of I is not equal to a dot. So if they're the same, it's not equal to a dot, we're going to return false. So it's not going to be a valid row, right? It's going to have duplicate entries. Next then, we want to check if the character is a digit. So I think we can use the character.isDigit call, pass in our array of I. So if it's not a digit, and again, and it's not a dot, then we'll also return a false. And if none of them conditions are satisfied, we will return true. Okay, so now let us validate this. Let's validate our board, our one-dimensional board. And all our columns are true. So let's just make this fail, and let's just replace the 3 with a 5. So we should have the first line should fail now, and it does, false. Okay, let's just change that back, 5 and 3. Okay. All right. So next we need to get a one-dimensional array for each of the columns. So we need to create another function, which will be get board calls. We will pass in the board, char, and we're going to pass in what column we're looking at. Okay. So we are going to iterate over all the rows for that column. So let's just do an int j is equal to 0, j is greater than or equal to board dot length, just 9 values, right? So J++. We want to create a variable to store all these values, all these cells from the columns. So return array, oops, is equal to new char of 9 elements. Okay. So we're going to do the return array of j is equal to the board of j and the column of 1. Okay. And now we're going to return this return array. All right. And let's just call this. Oops. So validate, and we're going to do get board calls. Going to pass in the board. I'm going to pass in I. Compiler. Oops, wrong code. All right, so we're printing out all of the columns. So let's just check. So in this first column, we should be getting 5, 6, dot, 847, dot, dot, dot. That's exactly what we're getting. And then we can just put a validation around that. Gotta stop submitting it. Okay, so they're all true. Okay, so let's just break it, right? So let's just instead of a 6 here, let's just put a 5 to break it. And you can see we failed it. Okay, so let's just return that 5 to a 6. Okay, so now we've got the rows, we've got the columns. Next is to get we need to get the boxes. Okay, so in terms of boxes, right, so we're going to create another function, get board boxes. We are going to pass in our board, and we're going to pass in, so we did say back here that we want to, if we can identify this position, this position, this position, this position, then it's kind of, we can just create an array to iterate over the rest of the box to get all the characters, right, that are part of this single digit array that we want to return. So if we pass in an int I and an int j to represent that position on the board, let's go and create our return array variable to store our elements, new char of 9. All right, so now we're going to iterate over int. So we've already used I and j, so let's use x. So I is going to be equal to, x is going to be equal to I initially, and x is going to be less than I plus 3, and x plus plus. Next, we're going to do a variable y is equal to j, and y is less than j plus 3, and y plus plus. And our return array is of position. We need to create an integer to hold our position. So z is equal to 0. Let's just increment that as we go, is equal to board of ij, board of xy, and then we need to return that. So return array Okay. So let's just print out an example of this, right? So get the board boxes. I'm going to pass in the board, BOARD. Pass in 0, 0, the first position, right? So we should get a one-dimensional array of 5, 3, dot 6, dot, dot, dot 9, 8. If we've no compilation errors. Okay, so let's scroll down here. So we can see 5, 3, dot 6, dot, dot, and dot 9, 8. Okay. So that will work. So now, once we've identified these initial positions, we can get all the cells in this box on the board. So now we need to identify these positions, right? So again, we're going to need another array. So we're going to need int I is equal to 0, I is less than board dot length I plus plus. Okay, so let's put you back over here. And we need, so we'll find, that will allow us to find the start position on the rows, and then we're going to need to find the start position on the cells. G++. All right, so let's put that in there. Oops. Let's put this all in here. And okay, so this is not going to fly. I is equal to 0. We're going to increment it by 1, so we're just going to end up iterating every row. So we need to increment I by 3 and j by plus or equal to 3. And pass in I and j. And we need to validate this. And let's actually, before we validate, let's just print it out to make sure we are getting what we want to get. Plus or equal to 3. All right, so what are we getting? Getting 5, 3. That's correct. The next one, dot 7, dot 1 and 5. Correct, 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 correct. Okay, cool. We are getting what we want. Okay, so now we can validate this. All right. Okay, so we're not going to print out everything. What we're going to do now is put an if statement. If it's not valid, we are going to return false. Just return anytime it is not valid, it will just bomb out, right? So if not valid for the board, make sure we have the right number of parentheses there. Return false. Do the same here. If not valid, return false. And same again here. If not valid, return false. And if we've checked everything and everything is okay, we'll return true. So let's just see, do we have any compilation errors there? Legal start of expression. So validate board. So if not valid, Not validate. Return false. So if validate is going to return true or false. So if a parentheses. Okay, let's see that. Check that. Oh, return false. Semicolon. Okay, so that accepted that. Okay, so that was a quick validation. So this second example should give us a false. So let's go in here. Put in our test case. Just format it as expected. This should return false because we got 8s here, and it does. Okay, so that's the validation of a Sudoku board Leetcode challenge. Thanks for watching.